Live from Washington, this is BBC News. The death toll rises to 16 now in Los Angeles. Fire crews there still battling those destructive wildfires and bracing for stronger winds.
This one is dropping fire retardant right on top of the fire there in a desperate bid to stop these flames.
U.S. Special Counsel Jack Smith, who led federal investigations into Donald Trump, has resigned just days before Trump retakes the White House. And UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves announces trade agreements worth £600 million during a visit to China, but is criticized for the timing of her trip. Hello, I'm Carl Nasman. Welcome to the program. We start with those wildfires in Los Angeles, where the death toll has now risen in just the last few minutes to 16. More evacuation orders have been issued. Crews continuing to battle those multiple wildfires. You can see here those live images. Really, well, you see an inferno there in the middle of the screen. Those wildfires still continuing to rage. The largest blaze now bearing down on a new area, the wealthy neighborhood of Brentwood. And in addition to those 16 deaths, around a dozen people now confirmed to be missing. Police dogs are helping to search for victims, while control efforts now being supported internationally. Firefighters from Mexico, you see them there arriving in the U.S. They are now working on some of those fire suppression efforts, as well as Canadian firefighters and people from 7 neighboring U.S. states as well. As those new firefighters arrived, California Governor Gavin Newsom expressed his gratitude.
This is what friends do. This is what relationships are all about. Friends in need, being there for one another. We want to be there for the people of Mexico in times of need and disasters, and we're incredibly humbled and grateful that the president was willing to send the crew you see behind me. They'll be out on the lines within the next 24, 36 hours, and we're very, very grateful.
Let's show you now some of those dramatic scenes from earlier in the day. Aircraft dropping really thousands of gallons of not only water, but fire retardant on the hills there in Los Angeles. That's in an attempt to try to not only put out the blazes, but keep them from spreading. More than 12,000 homes and other buildings have been destroyed. And there are fears that in the next hour or so, we could see the return of some of those very strong winds that have, in some ways, hindered the efforts to put out the fires and also have worked to spread them to other areas. There are right now, at this stage, 4 active fires. 2 blazes were fully contained earlier today. The Hearst and Kenneth fires are now more than 75% contained. The Eden fire, which is hitting the north of the city, is around 15% contained. And those high winds and dry conditions really working against firefighters that are battling the Palisades fire, which is the largest fire. 5 days on, just 11% containment. It's on track to become the most destructive in California's history. Our correspondent John Sudworth has more now on those firefighting efforts.
Well, we're standing overlooking Mandeville Canyon. This is the scene of the latest intense battle to control these fires. You can see the helicopters going in with their payloads of water, thousands of gallons being dropped every run. And they've been doing this all through the night last night, then again all through the day today. There's another one coming over here, just wave after wave, throwing everything they've got at the fires in the hope, of course, of trying to stop it reaching those houses down there, the houses here on the ridge, and further into the city of Los Angeles. At the moment, the weather has been on their side. The last couple of days have been relatively calm, but the forecast is for the winds to start picking up again. In fact, you might be able to see that has already begun to happen, and that is a real challenge. It was those strong Santa Ana winds at the beginning of this week that fueled this crisis in the first place, and real concern to try and get as much of this fire controlled before those winds come back again. Los Angeles, as you can see, is a city still in crisis, with this fight far from over.
Yeah, John Sutterworth there reporting the second largest fire, the Eden Fire, has burned more than 14,000 acres around the neighborhood of Altadena. That's where our correspondent Hilda Humphrey has been reporting today.
With so many communities destroyed and evacuation orders still in place, you have to look around areas like this one to get clues as to people's story, how they got out when the fires came through here. As you can see here, for example, didn't even have time to flee in their cars, but some of them completely burnt out, and just the dichotomy of others that are relatively unscathed. And as you go through areas like this one here in Altadena, what you'll see on the landscape time and time again is chimneys like this, essentially gravestones really of where these houses once stood. And of course, with people now in shelters, staying with family, of course they've got nothing to come back to. You start just to get to indications as to who might have lived here. In this home, for example, perhaps you can just make out behind me here that twisted metal of what appears to have been a home personal gym. That is some of the destruction that we are seeing in these areas, of course, as firefighters continue to battle those blazes.
I've been speaking to California State Senator Ben Allen. He represents the 24th District. That includes the very hard-hit Pacific Palisades area and the newly under threat area of Brentwood. We've seen so much activity today really focusing on protecting the areas around Brentwood. What's the latest that you're hearing, and what's the risk right now to people that live there?
Yeah, I just got off the phone with a good friend of mine who's a firefighter. He just came down from the mountain. The fire is tough up there. The winds, as you mentioned, are picking up again. We had a little bit of a lull. We also have very low humidity right now. So we're certainly concerned. That being said, we're hitting it with everything we have. We have a lot more assets now, a lot more firefighters in the area and planes. The winds are not so bad that we can't continue all these aerial drops that you've been looking at. So we're, I think they're feeling cautiously optimistic, but it's a heck of a fight, and the conditions are not great. But they have a lot of resources. There are a lot of firefighters all around, and they're just giving it everything they've got.
Yeah, I mean, it really does have a lot to do with the conditions there, the wind speeds. We saw earlier in the week how strong those really were. I mean, just walk us through how concerning it would be if in the next hour or so we see those wind speeds pick up to 50, 60 miles per hour once again.
Yeah, that would be very problematic. I mean, part of why the fire was so devastating in the Palisades back on Tuesday night was because of the speed. The wind speeds at that time were over 90 miles an hour. Wow. And they just rammed through the neighborhood. I went there. I've been there a couple times over the last couple of days. It's extraordinary to see the damage and the destruction that it wrought. Of course, what's interesting is because it was so ferocious but also so fast, it's part of why structures that are right in the middle of the fire zone didn't get burned, even though many others were getting burnt to a crisp. And it's because of the speed. The fire moved through so quickly, it destroyed everything that it touched, but of course it didn't touch everything. But these are still going to be heavy winds tonight, though not as bad as they were on Tuesday. And again, we have a lot more assets in place now, and we've dropped a lot of more retardant and water, and so I'm just hopeful that that'll make a big difference and save those communities up there.
We're looking at pictures right now of a fire that's continuing to burn in another area that you represent around Topanga, around Pacific Palisades. Those obviously have been areas that really were hit so hard. What have you been hearing from people that have been affected by the blazes there?
Oh gosh, I spoke at a service last night for a local community, local temple that got together to pray together and be together, and it was just so devastating. Hundreds of people showed up. Nearly all of them were at least evacuated, and maybe a third to a half of them had actually lost their homes. And just to see the looks in their eyes, families, just watch. They woke up on Tuesday morning, a normal day, getting ready for work, going to school, and many of them left to go and literally weren't allowed back in, and then their houses were gone. It's just this is an area that's not used to this kind of fire, not used to this kind of destruction, and it's nearly all gone now, at least certain neighborhoods there, and it's just so devastating for our community. It's a community I know really, really well, and I've got so many friends who've lost their homes. It's really, really it's been just so heartbreaking.
And you know, we've heard these tensions over cuts to the firefighting budget. We know that there were some warning alerts that went out to the wrong people in the region. We've heard stories, of course, of there just not being enough water to meet the demands of firefighters. Have you been hearing any of those frustrations from anyone in your area, the people you've been speaking with?
Of course. I mean, yeah, very much. I'm aware of every single one of those issues. And, you know, like so many, there's absolute reason to be angry and frustrated, and then there's also a reason why things went the way they did. And I'm happy to talk about any of those issues if you like.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to get your response. You know, we've seen so much commentary from people like Elon Musk, even the president-elect Donald Trump. We should say a lot of it is potentially misinformation, or at least misinformed. What would you say to those who are spreading that kind of message right now while these firefighting efforts are taking place?
Yeah, it's not helpful. I mean, let's be honest. There's going to be so much time for accountability for all of the people in charge. And I don't think any politician could ever try to excuse themselves from accountability. And there's going to be this is a massive catastrophe. There's going to be a lot of attention driven to this issue for a long time. But right now, we need to focus on fighting this fire and taking care of the people who are in the zone, making sure that everybody's safe. And that's really got to be where the focus is. I will say that many of the claims that have been amplified, even by very high profile people, have been false at worst, misleading at best. But there are some things to be discussed and quite frankly, debated and you know, for people to be frustrated about. I mean, it's true. They did cut the fire budget ask from the fire chief. And, you know, the city of Los Angeles is really, you know, insolvent. I mean, it's not in a strong financial position. And it's part of why they did that. We need to have that discussion. Why is that? It's a lot of, you know, massive legal payouts for all sorts of different things. And the mayor was trying her best to manage a very difficult budget and made this decision that in retrospect looks like a real mistake. That's a discussion I think we need to have coming out of this fire. But I will say that some of the rumors that have been out there are absolutely misleading. And the focus really needs to be on fighting this fire, getting all the resources we can get to fight this fire. This is not about partisanship right now. There are lots of Republicans up on that hill. There are lots of Democrats up on that hill. These are Americans. These are fellow human beings. And their homes deserve to be saved.
Well, Special Counsel Jack Smith has resigned from the U.S. Justice Department after overseeing 2 federal investigations into President-elect Donald Trump. Jack Smith filed his final report on his criminal investigations into Trump on January 7th, but the release of those documents has been temporarily blocked. Smith's resignation came in a court filing submitted on Friday, which urged to not further bar the release of that report. Here's our North America correspondent, Merlin Thomas.
Special Counsel Jack Smith has resigned after completing 2 investigations into the President-elect Donald Trump. Now, those 2 cases were about 1, Mr. Trump's alleged mishandling of classified documents, and number 2, his alleged attempts to overturn his 2020 election defeat against President Biden. Now, both of those criminal cases have been shelved, and that's because of a Justice Department policy that sitting presidents cannot be prosecuted. But the report still could be released. Now, this has been a long, protracted battle with lots of back and forths, but the bottom line is that a portion of these reports could still be released, and yet Mr. Trump's legal team could still ask the Supreme Court to intervene and to delay and block the release of those reports. So we still are watching to see what will happen with that. But Mr. Smith has been a thorn in the president-elect's side for a long time now. Mr. Trump called him deranged several times, and he also vowed to fire him as soon as he went into the Oval Office. And he even suggested that he might go after him in some form of political retribution. Either way, even though Mr. Trump may have won the legal battles, there still may be a final momentous clash as to whether the public gets to read any of Mr. Smith's findings.
Joining me live now to discuss all this is former federal prosecutor Anne-Marie McAvoy. Great to see you. Jack Smith stepping down, really not a surprise. That was kind of expected. But what did you make of the way that he did it? I mean, this was kind of buried in a footnote of some court documents.
Yes, I mean, everybody knew he was going to resign anyway, but it was an odd way to do it. I guess he kind of wanted to quietly get out of the office, or as quietly as he could. But it was a little surprising to see it done in an actual footnote.
Well, I mean, it now might be as good a time as any to look back at these last couple of years and Jack Smith's legacy. I mean, what kind of legacy do you think this will be? In a lot of ways, these were high-profile cases, trying a former and then future president. And, in the way, he kind of stayed out the spotlight during that whole period, didn't he?
He did. It was certainly more about the cases than about the person actually doing the prosecuting. Jack Smith was very successful at doing that, keeping it about the facts of the case. It certainly is going to be interesting and to look back on, as you've just said, and historians, I'm sure, will pore over these cases for years to come. Given certainly it was the first time ever that cases were brought against a presidential candidate, and here we had so many of them. And as it's turned out, it appears they've all basically gone bust. While he was sentenced yesterday, there was no actual penalty imposed upon him, no fines, no jail time, nothing. In the New York State case, the Georgia case is floundering with the DA, Fannie Willis, having been told to basically that she's being removed from the case by the appellate courts. And there's a big question as to whether that case will move on at all. And certainly Jack Smith's, both of his cases, which he clearly had high hopes for, both of which he had to himself actually have them dismissed.
Yeah, the classified documents case was dismissed, but against Donald Trump only. There's two co-defendants in that case. Mm-hmm. Do you get the sense that it could still go ahead with the co-defendants there?
It could potentially, but the reality is that it won't. I mean, the whole argument also about whether to release the report or not, all of that. I mean, once the Trump administration comes in and takes over on January 20th, they will then have full control of what the Department of Justice does. So I would be very, very surprised if the Trump Department of Justice does not immediately withdraw the rest of that case against the other two defendants where it's still pending.
In the end, do you think that Jack Smith was the right choice to prosecute these cases?
He certainly was very zealous in going forward. He came up with very unique ways to use the law to try to support these cases. He clearly worked hard on them, put a lot of time and effort into them. So I think without question, if you're looking for a prosecutor to try a case, he was about as he put in as much effort as you possibly could. I think the bigger question really is whether it made sense to bring these cases in the first place. I mean, when we look at the handling of the documents, the reality is that they looked at Biden's handling of documents and said, well, yeah, he did wrong too, but he's really too senile for us to even prosecute. So if you're not going against one, why would you go against the other? And there were real questions as to the viability of those claims. And of course, the other question, really the big question, was the timing and the effect that it had on the elections. And the reality is it seems to have backfired and gotten people essentially even more upset about the status quo and helped him undoubtedly win office.
Anne-Marie McAvoy, great to talk to you. An interesting development here, just kind of fading off into the sunset as Jack Smith withdraws from the public scene. Thanks for joining us to share your insights.
Thank you.
All right, well, Rachel Reeves has insisted that her visit to China is in the UK's national interest after reaching new trade agreements in Beijing. The Chancellor's visit, however, has been overshadowed by criticism as the UK struggles to bring up the value of the pound while borrowing costs have reached a 16-year high. Rachel Reeves says that the new deals will bring £600 million back into the UK economy over the next 5 years and help grow British businesses.
She may be here to do business.
Oh my goodness, it's so low, isn't it?
But she's facing criticism. She's fleeing heavy economic burdens at home. At the British-made Brompton bike shop in Beijing, she defended her visit.
Growth is the #1 mission of this government, to make our country better off. And that's why I'm in China, to unlock tangible benefits for British businesses exporting and trading around the world.
This is a major relationship reset, the first meeting between a UK Chancellor and her Chinese counterpart in 7 years. China's economy is too tantalising to turn down amid the UK's economic woes. The US and the EU have imposed huge tariffs on these electric vehicles, but the UK has not. It will please Beijing if London does not follow Donald Trump's lead. But the Chancellor will know there are risks that come with this new partnership.
Rachel Reeves keeps using the word pragmatic. What she says she's trying to do is to balance the UK's economic needs with its security concerns. But that brings up some serious issues because China will bristle at the mention of any human rights concerns, at the mention of allegations that it's supporting Russia's war in Ukraine and allegations that it's spying in the UK.
It seems the meetings went well.
The total value of what we have agreed today is worth £600 million over the next 5 years for the UK economy.
The UK imports more than twice as many goods from China than it sends here. This relationship is not one of economic equals. But the Chancellor for now is betting on Beijing in the hope it will eventually make Britain better off. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Beijing.
There have been celebrations in parts of Sudan after the army captured the eastern city of Wad Madani from the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The leader of the RSF acknowledged that loss, but he vowed to continue fighting the Sudanese army until victory, even if he says it takes another 20 years. The RSF militia, which has controlled the city for the past year, has been accused of widespread human rights abuses. And just this week, the U.S. officially designated its actions as a genocide. Since Sudan's civil war began, tens of thousands of people have been killed, more than 11 million have been displaced, and the UN says the war has created the world's worst famine. For more on this, I spoke to Youssef Taha of the BBC's World Service. Just tell us more about the significance of this victory that we're hearing about by the Sudanese army.
This is very significant because the Rapid Support Forces have been holding Wad Madani for over a year. So this is a very major defeat for them, and that was reflected in General Hemeti, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti, in his tone and his rambling audio message. Usually he makes video messages, but this one was audio, and he was very angry in it, and he used some colorful language to describe his opponent, General Burhan, the leader of the Sudanese army. And he said that, yes, it's a loss, but just loss of one battle rather than losing the war. And he said that he is prepared with his forces to continue fighting. They have been now fighting for about 21 months. It started in April 2 years ago. And he said it's 20 months now, but he's prepared to fight for another 21 years, as he put it, until the tables are turned and that they win this war and put General Burhan on trial.
What about for the people themselves? We heard there about the celebrations in the streets after this victory. And as we mentioned, the RSF has been accused of these human rights abuses in the area too.
Well, they deny committing any abuses, as General Hemeti said earlier in his recording. And he said that they have not killed anyone. They would only kill people, as he put it, after a trial ruling, but no trials have taken place until after this war ends. But the celebrations have taken place in various parts in Sudan and even outside Sudan itself as well, and some have been chanting Wad Madani is back, Wad Madani is free, and also one army, one country. And this, of course, is inspired by the fact that General Dagalo and General Burhan, the leader of the army, have been actually power sharing previously, but they fell out. So the two were leading the transitional government that was formed after the removal of long-term President Omar al-Bashir in 2019. But then there was an incident in 22 in March when an army officer shot dead at close quarters one of the protesters, and this was a trigger for General Dagalo to seize upon and fell out with his command, with his boss, and they started this civil war.
Here's a look now at some other news. The Israeli military says 4 of its soldiers have been killed and 6 others injured in the north of Gaza. They've said to have come under fire and been hit by an explosive device in the town of Beit Hanun, an area where Israel has recently intensified its offensive. Earlier, Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry said 32 Palestinians were killed in Israeli strikes over the past 2 days. German authorities say an oil tanker that belongs to Russia's Shadow Fleet is stuck in the Baltic Sea. These pictures show German tugboats dragging the tanker to safer waters after it lost power and steering. Germany believes Russia uses the vessel, which is carrying about 100,000 tons of oil, to avoid sanctions. Joe Biden has awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian honor, to Pope Francis. President Biden was unable to give the award in person. He canceled a trip to the Vatican in order to focus on the response to the California wildfires. In the citation accompanying the medal, the White House described Francis as the people's pope, commanding people to fight for peace and protect the planet. And before we go, let's return to our top story, those wildfires raging in Los Angeles. We can show you now some live images from the scene. And you can see as night has fallen, you really get a sense of exactly where those fires are burning, where the hot spots are, where those embers potentially could spread to other areas of the city. Of course, we now know in about the last hour, the death toll there has risen to 16 people. Of course, about a dozen more people are still missing. Dogs have been brought in to try to locate more victims in those fires. You can see those efforts continue to try to control the blazes, put out those fires, but they are now threatening some areas of Los Angeles, Brentwood for one. The goal is to keep them, of course, from spreading further. More on that story coming up on BBC News.
What's behind the rise in alcohol-related deaths from liver disease among women under 40? Now on BBC News, Panorama.
I'm Hazel Martin, a journalist living in Glasgow. Ever since my teens, I've been a social drinker. Earlier this year, I received a life-changing diagnosis, and I've been told I need to stop drinking completely. I want to understand how and why this has happened to me, and ask whether alcohol industry marketing has helped turn young women like me into binge drinkers.
It's the alcohol company's job to identify new markets and market very aggressively to women.
With alcohol deaths at their highest since records began, I want to reveal the situation in the UK's hospitals.
The current kind of tsunami of liver disease that we're seeing, our health services are not going to be able to cope.
And meet those who almost paid the ultimate price.
I was told that I had less than 36 hours left to live. At the time, I was living my best version of my life. Where I ended was at death's door.
As a fit and active 31-year-old, I just assumed everything was fine.
What does it suit you to do us live later? About 9:45? Excellent.
I'd worked hard to develop in my career as a BBC journalist. I had a fun and hectic social life as a student and in my 20s.
What's a pixie?
I'm crying.
And then I became a new mum to a beautiful wee girl.
I had a young child. I was absolutely exhausted, and no wonder. But even so, I made an appointment with my GP and I went in for some blood tests.
I had no idea this meeting would be such a major turning point.
There is actually a little screen of bloods that GPs do quite often called Tired All the Time, TATT we call it. But one of the tests in that screen is liver function, and that was the one that was abnormal in your case.
In a healthy person, this figure should be less than 40. Mine was 213.
I thought, so let's get you up to the hospital and get the proper imaging done, see what's really going on here.
In February, I came here to the New Victoria Hospital in Glasgow, where the test results revealed a shocking diagnosis.
In patients who've got liver conditions, we try and exclude other types of problems such as autoimmune, viral, hereditary conditions, and these were excluded. And we also did another test called a FibroScan test. So a normal score should be less than 7. Above 12 or so, it would felt to be cirrhosis. Your score was 10.2, so it did show quite severe, significant scarring present.
To understand what had caused my level of scarring, what conclusion did you come to?
In your case, we worked out, we felt this was most likely to be alcohol, and if you continued to drink, then I was worried that you were going to go on and develop cirrhosis of the liver. So the most important thing for you at that time was to stop drinking.
I had been diagnosed with ARLD, alcohol-related liver disease. It had been caught just below the threshold for permanent damage.
I remember walking through this park and feeling shell-shocked and quite numb. I was 31, a young professional with a good job, a good career, a family, home, you know, a vibrant social life.
The guidelines for both men and women say you shouldn't drink more than 14 units a week. That's about 6 glasses of wine. On nights out with friends, we probably all exceeded that, but it was social drinking. I wasn't drinking every day.
It was frightening and I felt shame. I remember thinking, God, I can't believe I've done this to myself.
I want to dig into the facts around alcohol-related liver disease. I can't be alone. There must be other people going through this.
They call liver disease a silent killer. There are no symptoms in the early stages, and 7 in 10 people won't know that there's anything wrong with them until they turn up at A&E. And that is terrifying. In front of me are the numbers and the statistics and the graphs that are indicating to me that there is a rising problem that nobody is talking about.
Across the UK, alcohol-specific deaths are at their highest since records began. In 2001, there were more than 5,500 deaths, but by 2022, it had topped 10,000. The mortality rates are still highest among men, especially older men, but I'm really shocked to see the figures for younger women. This graph focuses on deaths in women aged 35 to 44. It tracks the relative change for the main 6 diseases in England, going back more than 50 years.
The number of people dying of major diseases like diabetes, cancers and heart disease are all falling, except for liver disease, which is skyrocketing.
In 1968, 36 women in this cohort died of liver disease. And by 2022, there were 356 deaths. Adjusting for the rise in population, that is still an 8-fold increase.
I find that really shocking, I just really do. The thing is, we know that there has been so many public health campaigns and, adverts about how we need to get mammograms and checking yourself. But actually the same can be said for liver disease, getting checked here. We never hear about that. Why is no one talking about it?
The statistics show a changing profile of who is affected by alcohol-related liver disease. Why are women under 45 dying in increasing numbers? I want to know what this situation looks like on the ground in our hospitals. I've come to King's College Hospital in London to talk to consultant hepatologist Debbie Shawcross at one of the biggest liver units in the UK.
We're absolutely busy. So on Monday, we had probably one of our busiest days that I've known in a couple of years in terms of the number of patients that had come in over the weekend or had been transferred for expert care.
Who is on this ward and what kind of people are you seeing?
What we're seeing is a huge proportion of younger individuals who present with liver disease and liver failure, sometimes as young as 20. One of the groups we see are actually highly successful women in their 40s and 50s. They have great careers, but they're also juggling things. They're spinning plates in the air, and they've maybe got young families, they've got other things going on. They're not alcoholics, they've never probably even been drunk, but they are just drinking too much as a habit, really.
What you have described in that answer, you're talking about me. I didn't have a physical dependency, but it's been a life-changing diagnosis. For me.
Actually, it's okay to talk about this. It's a national problem. It's not a personal problem. It's something we need to deal with as a nation to actually make everybody healthier.
I want to find out what could have happened to me if my condition hadn't been discovered in time. I've come to meet Emma Jones. At 39, she's 7 years older than me and grew up in North Wales.
I was always a super sociable person, had loads of different groups of friends, was always going out. Went to university, studied law. As my career started to progress, there's always tends to be a drink there, or after meetings we would all go to the pub. I didn't touch spirits. So when I was out with friends, we would all go in round, buy a bottle of wine, share it between 3-4 of us. I was just drinking the same amount as everybody else around the table at the time. I didn't see myself with a problem at all until COVID hit. I was living alone in London. The way the world was, it was a really scary place to be, and I found that I was relying more on alcohol, and I think it spiraled from there. At most, I was drinking about 3 bottles of wine a day. I knew it was affecting me as a person, but at no one point did I think internal organs were failing. And then in October 2022, I went to stay with a friend. Basically, all the symptoms had kicked in by this point. I was jaundiced. I'd lost a dramatic amount of weight, and that night she took me into hospital and was told that I had less than 36 hours left to live.
You must have been terrified.
I was petrified. It was the wake-up call I needed, but in my head it was too late. I'd done the worst thing I could have done, which is kill myself.
Emma was in end-stage liver failure. Her only hope lay in a liver transplant. In the UK, you need to prove sobriety for 6 months before you're eligible to go on the transplant list.
I was told the likelihood of me surviving the 6 months was very minimal, but I gave it a go. I got my transplant on the 7th of July, 2023, 15 months ago.
Yeah. How has things been? How do you feel?
Yeah, I feel incredible, but it's a different life. It's a different life. So obviously you've got your scar. Luckily for me, I relish my scar. I love it. But you've got a lifetime of hospital visits, and I will be on anti-rejection tablets for the rest of my life. The guilt is unreal, but I've been given a second chance at life, so I'm definitely making the most of it.
So when you hear about people having end-stage liver disease, you think that they've been heavy drinking for a number of years. I know that my own drinking was exacerbated during lockdown. So to have things turn so bad so quickly puts that into perspective. And that's terrifying.
Meeting Emma and talking with Professor Debbie Shawcross has given me a lot to process. I find myself thinking differently about our relationship with alcohol as a nation, and also about my own history.
You know, when I was in my 20s, I drank a lot. You know, don't think I ever had a sober birthday. I was in a band, for example, with 6 other guys, and we would play around pubs and clubs, and, you know, a lot of the time we got paid and drink. I'm 5'4" and 8.5 stone, and forgetting that I can't drink like a guy, but I would, just because it was normal around me.
But I never thought of myself as drinking in a way that would give me liver damage. We weren't drinking every day. I guess we were binge drinking. Could that have been enough to cause this harm? I want to know more about the possible impact of this pattern of drinking. I've come to the Royal Free in North London to meet Dr. Gautam Mehta. He is one of the authors of a recent study looking at the connections between binge drinking and liver disease.
When you think about binge drinking, people have a vision of people sprawling out of bars and clubs and, you know, falling around by bus stops. That's not what we mean biologically.
What is a binge?
So we can define a binge. It's defined by the World Health Organization, and it's also in UK guidance. So for a woman, it's 6 units of alcohol at one sitting, and for a man, it's 8 units.
I'm trying to make sense of that.
6 units could be 2 large glasses of wine. So if you have 2.5 regular sized glasses of wine or 2 large glasses of wine, and you're a female, you're at your limit for being below a binge level.
Do people have a hard time believing that that is real and that will cause you harm if you accept that?
Yeah, so I think they do. What we recently showed was that binge drinking on its own, even with a weekly consumption less than 14 units, will increase your risk of liver disease.
Wow.
So if you had a binge pattern of drinking at sort of a 6-unit level at least once a week, then your risk of liver cirrhosis was incremented between 2- and 3-fold. But the risk goes up if you binge more, 9 units, let's say. So that's 3 glasses of wine now, large glasses of wine. Then that increments your risk further to around 4 times.
Dr. Mehta's new research is telling us that for a woman, drinking 2 large glasses of wine in one session is a binge. Drinking at this level, at least weekly, can double or treble your risk of liver damage in the long term. And 3 large glasses of wine in one night could put you at up to 4 times the risk. As we come up to Christmas and I look at all of these people, I think, does everyone else know this? It makes me want to have a really frank chat with my friends and family.
That's quite fun.
We've been going out and drinking together for years. But tonight, I'm on the alcohol-free beer.
The first time I ever got drunk was with you.
I maybe was the bad influence.
I think we were 15.
Yeah, 14, 15.
And I remember we had a half bottle of vodka. I remember we both got drunk and then we were both sick. What do you think the medical definition of a binge is?
I would say 7 units.
7 units in a binge?
I was going to say more, like 10. I want 10.
10?
I'm going to guess like 6 or something. Shut up.
It's 6.
Hey.
It's 6. So Lindsay and Laura, 6 units in a binge, but Robbie and Brian, 8. So like a bottle of wine is 9 units.
People say binge drinking is going out to a pub
Yeah,
or a pub and
not binge drinking as in drinking a bottle of wine in your house watching TV.
It was like a normal thing that we did.
It's the culture. In other cultures there's initiation, transitioning to an adult. But in the UK, our initiation is when can we drink?
Yeah.
Isn't this just a rite of passage that everyone has gone through over the decades? Was my generation any different? I've come to meet Professor Fiona Measham, a leading expert on drink and drugs culture in the UK over the last 40 years.
I was born in 1992. Can you put that into context for me, into where my generation kind of fits in?
Yeah, absolutely. So it used to be that pubs were quite male spaces, male-dominated spaces. Women might come along at weekends, but they would come along usually sort of at the invitation of men. There was a real change in the early 1990s that I saw. And I was doing research on raves, and what we could see was that the raves were really attractive for young women. There was a sense of equality, and also people weren't drinking. And so I think for the alcohol industry, this is a bit of a wake-up call. You know, there's a concerted effort to woo female customers. So we see the advent of Alco Pops, we see the start of the bottled spirit mixers, and also shots or shooters for the first time that were marketed to young women, and they were appealing to young women.
I can remember Alco Pops coming out. I can remember being in uni and someone walking around with, you know, shots and, you know, in the holsters. Yeah, I can remember all that. Looking back at that, what point did you think that there was something wrong here?
I wouldn't say that at the time it felt wrong. What it did feel like was unbridled, shall we say. Women's drinking pretty much doubled in a really short period of time. I mean, I think it was about 10 years. People who started drinking really in any time, that from when you were born in 92 right through to 2010, and that was really the time where we saw the least responsible drinking practices, when the alcohol industry was most targeting women.
What was everyone thinking? Like, of course this was going to be a public health nightmare.
You actively had companies throwing all this marketing towards young women. My generation was growing up right through that. Pieces of the puzzle are starting to slot into place. I understand more now about why we were drinking like that when we were young. But as we've got older and our priorities have changed, has the alcohol industry continued to target the same group of women now in our 30s and 40s? Professor Carol Emsley has studied the way that alcohol has been marketed to women and has founded an online campaign highlighting its presence in our everyday lives.
Nobody thinks that marketing works on them, and yet the alcohol industry is spending huge sums of money in doing it. If you go into any supermarket, there's a whole array of pink drinks with shaped, elegant bottles or slimline cans that are echoing the idea that some products are associated with slimness and beauty and wellness. A few years ago, we started a social media campaign called Don't Pink My Drink, which was really to try and show the variety of cynical ways that women are marketed to with alcohol. I think quite often alcohol companies are very good at identifying trends or identifying what's been talked about, but then they really magnify it. So it's very cleverly interwoven into women's lives using things that they're talking about already. So this idea of kind of time for self, self-care and empowerment is very much harnessed by the alcohol industry to sell to women. And the market has grown and grown for women in their 30s, 40s and 50s now. It's these cohorts of women that are continuing to drink at quite heavy levels.
Talk to me, if you can, about whether there's a correlation between all of this marketing and actually the impact that it has on women's health.
There's been a huge increase in deaths attributed to alcohol among women. So I think it's really important that we balance these things out. You know, the need for companies to make profit with the harm that is done by that profit. Make no mistake, they see it as their job to market to women, and they will resist to the best of their ability any attempts to reduce the power that they have.
The Portman Group, which represents the alcohol industry, says, while the increase in alcohol-related liver disease among both women and men in the UK is a serious concern, it's important to remember that alcohol has always been a legal product. It says its code of practice does not protect against gender-based marketing specifically, but sets minimum standards for alcohol producers to market their products responsibly. And it's committed to continuing its efforts to promote moderate drinking, as well as holding the alcohol industry to account. The Department of Health and Social Care says the serious damage alcohol can cause to health has been overlooked for far too long, and the 10-year plan will shift the focus of the NHS from sickness to prevention. Any policy change will take time, but this is a problem now. Today I've come to Nottingham, where one charity, the British Liver Trust, has taken matters into its own hands at their Love Your Liver roadshow.
Cirrhotic liver. It doesn't look healthy at all, does it? You're in big trouble if your liver's like this.
I'm one of the nurses at the British Liver Trust. Hello. So this machine here gives us a wee bit of indication of the health of your liver. Okay.
This vehicle is kitted out with a FibroScan, the same instrument that detected the damage to my liver. Folk are invited to come on board and take this free 5-minute test to find out the health of their liver.
If anything is starting to cause damage to the liver, that obviously makes the tissue stiffer, and the machine simply measures that level of liver stiffness on a gradient. So it's telling us whether the liver is in a healthy state or not, and if not, how advanced that damage is.
Hello?
Hiya.
You want to just pop up front there?
Saw you guys setting up this morning over here, and I was like, I have been drinking a fair amount, and I did go to university, so I probably did a bit of damage there. Probably best to go and get it checked out.
Yeah, so that's a really good score, my love.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
I've quit drinking for 32 days today. I just want to make sure everything's still okay now that I've stopped. But before that, I've been kind of under pressure with courses and stuff like that, so I've been pretty much drinking all year. What's my bad boy saying?
It says that your liver is nice and healthy.
Good.
Nothing to worry about.
Wicked, thank you very much.
No problem.
Everybody that we have spoken to, thankfully, have all had very low readings. Like when I was FibroScan last, my reading was 10.2. You know, I was thinking I can't be the only person this has happened to, and I just wondered what you thought about
No,
that.
you're not alone. So if I go back 20 years, people with alcohol-related liver disease look much more like me, they're middle-aged men, whereas that has changed. So although it's still a predominantly male problem, women are catching up, I'm afraid.
The British Liver Trust has only one of these vehicles. Working at full capacity, they can scan around 100 people a day.
We've scanned nearly 90 people so far, and we've already found 8 people out of those 90 who need to visit their GP and get some follow-up checks to find out exactly what's happening with their liver.
We asked the British Liver Trust to analyse their figures. Of the people under 40 who have used their roadshow, 1 in 15 showed signs of possible liver damage.
For me, you know, it started with a blood test, and then it was more blood tests, then it was blood tests 6 months later, and then it was an ultrasound, and then eventually it was a FibroScan.
So to be able to just pull in off the street, get your liver scanned, and be done with it is really cool.
It's been nearly 10 months since my original diagnosis, and I've managed to stay off alcohol completely. Today, I've been invited back to the hospital for a follow-up scan. This scan will reveal whether my liver has been able to heal or whether I'm facing permanent damage. My original FibroScan reading was 10.2, just under the threshold for liver cirrhosis. A healthy reading would be 7 or under.
Hazel.
Hi.
Here you come.
Thank you. With all the changes I've made in my life the past year, has it been enough?
Okay.
That's you. Well done.
Okay.
Much better.
Really?
4.7.
You're joking. That's a big difference. That's a really big difference.
So, 4.7, IQR 4%, and CAP 182.
Fantastic. It's a fantastic result. The improvement has been quite staggering, really, in a relatively short space of time. You could drink again, but I think you've got to be wary of the habits or the bad habits you developed in the past, and do they creep back in again, and then you're back in a similar situation or potentially worse in the future. So I think the ideal way would be to try and avoid alcohol in the future.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Data.
Take care.
I feel lucky to have such a drastic improvement in such a short space of time. You can't get away from the fact that I could have gone the other way, and I could be sitting here coming to terms with the fact that I have damaged part of me irreparably, which is exactly what could have happened, and I think that's what happens to so many people. In my case, it took a shocking medical diagnosis to force me to break patterns of damaging behaviour. Is it time the alcohol industry and government took our binge drinking culture more seriously too? I can't ignore the relationship that alcohol has played in my life. This is never going to happen again because I am well and healthy. My liver is anyway. And, you know, I don't think you can underestimate that and how good that feels.